the Wolf Connection podcast.
So we just saw our new open that Stephen created. I know our guest just was able to witness it before we got on here on the podcast, and she's been with us for a while, at least been with Wolf Connection for a long time. How long has it been, Laurie?
Been 7 years, June.
7 years.
7 years. Yeah.
That's crazy.
I know.
That's so nuts. And you have so many hats. I mean, and we're going to get into your private work, but also the work that you do here. And those of you who don't know, so Laurie Cousins has been, volunteer, program facilitator, a trauma-informed educator, and so many other things. But you sent me this awesome new program that you're starting to spearhead here and bringing in some of the work that you're doing private-based and getting back to nature. And we're going to dive into that. But how are you?
I'm good. I mean, as you know, I was just out with the animals and, cleaning up the habitats and hiking, and I didn't have to do the bulls, for feed. So I'm good with that. It just means more hiking, really. But so I'm glad. I'm so excited. And that new opening is incredible. Wow.
Yeah.
Just to see how far it's come from this idea, really, because of the pandemic. We're like, oh my gosh, we're kind of stuck. I mean, it was great for us to be here. At least we had, I think of this place as a refuge, that we could be. But then the creativity that came out of it, and to see 250 or 70 episodes later, I'm so happy. It's just, you both should be incredibly proud.
I mean, it's been a very long journey, but we've hit our 250, and it was nice to get over that hump. And I think now we have more freedom than we did in the beginning. I think even just to explore the creative side.
Yeah.
And you all are a part of that, obviously. And being guests in the early episodes that I've been QCing lately, and putting up transcripts. So there's a lot of cool things happening. But I want to talk about your background, and you grew up in California, right?
I'm born and raised in Los Angeles. I lived in New York for a long time, but then came back here, raised my kids. And and part of what got me into this work, I mean, being in Los Angeles, I was always a nature girl. I was always active and different, like Greenpeace and World Wildlife Fund and Heal the Bay and, all that kind of stuff. So very connected to nature. And then part of my work as being a trauma-informed educator, a mindfulness teacher, and I can get all technical with these terms, but an integrative somatic practitioner, which means a holistic approach of working and healing. And it was part being here. Also, it wasn't necessarily that easy growing up in Los Angeles. And I loved the diversity for sure and the culture and stuff, but I did come from a, complex trauma background. And so that's kind of what speared me into that. And animals were always the one thing that I felt I connected to.
Yeah.
They were my angels. They were the one thing that really saved me from different times and stages of my life.
Man, I just talk about that a little bit too, because animals just seem to, especially in this work.
Yeah.
We don't, I think animal people come to animal places because they've had a profound effect or something with them. What was it like for you growing up and getting into this work and then bringing it here to the sanctuary?
Yeah, I mean, one thing that part of what we offer here, the 8-week Human Empowerment Leadership Program for youth, what inspired me working specifically with youth as well is because of my own troubled youth. And, I had a very similar path to some of the youth that we work with, and especially with the expulsionary schools, because at one point I was in high school and I was very involved in, I would say, self-harming and, seeking trouble and different things. And because I was hurting, I had pain, I didn't know how to process it. There was alcoholism in the home. There was all these different things that we're going to seek some kind of soothing. We don't know it's harmful long-term, but it's anything to survive, right? And then I was able to find a path around 16 where people worked with me in a way that I heard them. And it wasn't an easy path. It was like, look, you got to face your stuff, but you don't have to do it alone. I really started to understand the importance of a pack, as far as that, because I think most of the suffering came from feeling so alone and having so much self-loathing and untreated pain. And I think what ultimately why there's harm is because of the unmet pain, with ourselves and others, because of the disconnection and then going into a survival response. So part of my healing journey has been a holistic one, more of a mind, body, spirit. I've always sought out indigenous wisdom and as well, because, there was something to be said about just traditional psychological Western practice and knowledge. But in my own journey of healing, it just wasn't meeting it. Like, there's got to be more, there's got to be more. So when I started working in a way that was more somatic based, and this is where that led me into nature-based therapy.
Got it.
Which was, the somatic based is more of a body-centric approach to healing. So it's, we have cognitive theory and different type of modalities, therapeutic modalities, but it's also, you can think of it as a top-down approach. We're trying to understand the story, make this narrative of ourselves, making meaning and purpose from the adversity, or, who am I? All this kind of meta thinking, which is powerful to create this coherent narrative. But at the same time, our body also has a story that it's carrying, right? And the body is much more honest in the way that our mind we can create a lot of stories, or been conditioned to believe a lot of things that aren't necessarily true as well. And so when we look at it in a way that nature is real, nature is raw, it's honest. And what drew me to nature-based therapy, which falls under ecological therapy. So if you look at eco, we're talking about life, right? And it's also the Latin word meaning home. So I think of this ecosystem that we all live in. And when you look at ecology, it's the study of in these ecosystems, this organism that's in relationship with environment. So when we're looking at nature-based therapy, we're looking at my relationship to myself in the natural world and how it can be a mirror. So when we're working with these young people here, this is what this assisted animal therapy is, with the wolf therapy, with the animal, with the wolves, because they can mirror back these stories of themselves, of like the leader in them, the
nanny or the beta,
nanny,
something,
right? All of these things that they have that maybe they've denied themselves, or there's plenty of things in life that are going to steer you away from, what you feel is authentically you. And we're going to, one thing about like attachment theory, which is another psychological term, attachment theory is focusing on the bonding of the child with the caregiver, right, with the parent. It's essential. Our life depends on it as children. But it also can be that if we have to choose being authentic in who we are, and that is different from the caregivers and what they want from us, or what the conditions lead in our environment, we're going to have to suppress or minimize or hide or maybe have like that's part of something that we don't really own about ourselves, to seek the bond of the relationship. Do you know what I mean?
I think so, yeah. So just to jump in, do you think it's, from your experience, when you see this, and that because of all the trauma that we get from many outside sources,
right,
nature-based therapy sort of brings us back to a relationship that we might have lost? Is that similar to what you're speaking to, or something that brings us back to where we find our uniqueness that we might not find out in the world? I don't know if that's something that...
Yeah, I think, so if we look at ecology coming home, right, this eco and then therapy being healing, how do we heal to come back to the essence of who we are?
Got it.
So just like with the animals here, right, they've been conditioned to believe that they should be something other than they are, which
Right.
is a confused dog, right? Like, am I a wolf? Am I a dog? You know, you're treating me, but authentically, when they come here, we're giving them the space and honoring the essence of who they are and saying, be the wolf that you are. We don't want you to be who you were taught or supposed to be to please us, right? A lot of these animals and domestic dogs are raised to please, right? And so, as we know, the wolves are not here to please.
Right, they are.
They'll be in relationship, right? But there's this equality. There's this shared respect. And so when you're looking at the dynamic of a parent and a child, there is, an element of power over, and it's like, no, you're going to do this. And this is what we're hoping, can we get back to what was the essence of who we are? What were we naturally drawn to? And so when you're in nature, this is how I think of it, because I work with a lot of different groups and populations. And I just, as you know, last week did my women's retreat in a nature-based setting, which was amazing. And 30 women coming together. And it's really with these wisdom traditions. So we're using mindfulness practices. We're using the natural world and the way that we're relating to it. And when you're standing in front of a tree, you're not being judged, right?
This is true.
You're not being judged. When you are standing in front of a creek, you're experiencing a natural organic rhythm. There is this essence and flow in nature. Well, when we're looking at stress, when we're looking at toxic stress, when we're looking at, health as a way that we're holding a lot of tension in our body, there can be ways that we're going against the flow of our own nature. So that means that we're overworking, we're not sleeping enough, we're, all these different things that we can be overeating, undereating, all these different things that if we were listening intuitively, what do I need? What's best for me? How can I care for myself? Instinctually, a wolf is going to care for themselves, right?
Right.
But it's also, when we look at the way that our life is in the modern world, it's very mind-centric. We worship the mind in the way of knowledge and science and all this. And I got into that as well. I love neurobiology. I love understanding, neuro, the mind, and biology, the body, and this, how they work together. But at the same time, there's this innate intuitive wisdom that we have, that I feel that this overconsumption, this of consuming, meaning digital, the computer, the social media, the iPhones, this is actually going against our nature. As children, we used to play outside all the time. Now people could say, yeah, but that's when people, kids got hurt and in trouble, whatever. But there was also grit. There was also character building. There was also co-regulation with the nervous system. Being out in nature, we know there's science that shows that your nervous system, it starts to what's called the co-regulation of your vagal tone. So the vagal tone, so Stephen Porges' theory is polyvagal theory. And so the vagal nerve, here we have this cranial nerve that goes out throughout our whole body, right down to our tailbone. This is part of the autonomic nervous system. And what this does is in charge of the parasympathetic part of our nervous system. This is the rest and digest. Versus the sympathetic part of our nervous system is the fight, flight, freeze. And these are instinctual, these are survival based, right? I would say that what's causing so much stress, toxic stress in society and in the way that we're living in the modern way is this overstimulated sympathetic nervous system. It's just constantly that fight, flight, freeze, appease. Like it's in survival mode. When does it go into rest? When does it go into digest? Does that make sense?
Yeah. So when you're that's the parallel I think you're drawing right to the mind based, right? Where we're thinking about so many different things, or we're taking in so many things and having so many tasks and things to do, right, where we can't be our natural selves. And that's where you're talking about. Speak to your mindfulness therapy, because whenever you're here on site and you talk about it,
right,
we don't really get to dive into that. So is that similar to what you're talking about when you're out in nature and you do these nature therapies, is that you're looking at the rhythms of the creeks or the rivers, seeing the swaying of the trees. Are these things that we don't necessarily connect with in our own bodies, and those are the rhythms that we need to get back to? How do those practices sort of meet?
I mean, great question. So I would say this. So with mindfulness, it's about being present, but it's a quality of attention. We're not just present. It's this attitude that's curious and friendly. So it's this non-judgmental awareness. And when we are over-identified in our mind, like this overthinking that some people will talk about all the time, I can't stop. I can't shut it up, right? It's like, when does this part stop? It's like, it wakes me up in the middle of the night, right?
Right.
All that kind of stuff. So these are states of our mind that can go into rumination, right? And this can be, very impactful with our mental health and our self-image. Is this, oh, if only I said that, or why did that happen? And we're stuck in the past. And then in the future, we can go into this worst case scenario, catastrophic thinking, and, oh my God, but what if that happens? What if that? And that's the future. And anxiety lives in the future. Depression lives in the past. Things that I feel stuck, I can't change. What if the worst thing happens? Oh my God, and coming from fear. Mindfulness is about presence. It's about being in the moment. And that's where the science again, you can feel this for yourself. People report being happier no matter what they're doing when they're present. That's, this research that was done at UCLA. Even if you're washing the dishes, if you're just present as opposed to when we're in autopilot and we're thinking, like our brain doesn't turn off.
Right.
So this is this training of attention to stay present. So when we're working with the animals here and say something like, Jax gets activated and his hackles come up, right? That sympathetic part of their nervous system is activated and they go into a flight or fight, right? And they're prepared for a threat. And then he realizes, oh, it's nothing. It was Daisy or,
and
whatever it is.
he shuts it off, kind of a thing.
He shakes it off, right? That comes back to that regulation of the parasympathetic. And so now we're in a homeostasis in our nervous system. So meaning that what happens, this is what the animal does. Oh, false alarm. Okay, know what? Back in the moment.
Right.
What the mind does for human beings, especially when we're dealing with unprocessed trauma and we're kind of prone to anxiety and different things, is that we go, but what if they come back? But what if it was something?
We're always thinking about worst or best case scenarios, right? So we're constantly looking for the next thing as opposed to dealing with whatever it is in the moment, resetting. I mean, that's part of it too, right? Is we don't reset in the moment. We stick with it or think about the next task or whatever it might be, as opposed to dealing with whatever event that is. So let's say it's doing the dishes, just doing them, putting them away, giving ourselves a beat, and then moving to the next. And so that's where a lot of this comes back and reconnects. I mean, I feel that too when we're here. And I do get sometimes I'm like, we have X amount of tasks to do.
Right.
And you don't focus on the thing you're in right now because you're constantly not prepared. You're constantly preparing.
Yes.
Or thinking about the next thing.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And there's one thing to plan ahead, but there's one thing to live in the future.
Right.
Right. And then I would say also because of, these have been very challenging times since the pandemic. We had a collective trauma. So a global pandemic, that affected us collectively. And then, personally, individually, people have their own stuff to work with anyway.
Right.
We've got our own material, if you will. And so, when we have these different dynamics going on, we can get stuck into these mental states and not realize it. Like when someone says, hey, how you doing today? And you're like, wait, what? Oh, I didn't even hear you. Where were we? And what we have is what, the neuroscience says is a negativity bias. So the negativity bias is that we are wired to look for what's wrong in a very primitive way. Like if we look at the oldest part of our brain, if we were looking at it in a way that it's evolved over time, the brain stem is an instinctual device, if you will, that just cares about Are we going to be safe and live?
I was going to say, is that the tool that we've been given since birth? Is we need to survive.
Totally.
And that's essentially it. And so that's our default mechanism.
Our default.
And so we have to work, I'm sure, extra hard, or 10 times, however much harder, to think not only positively, but to be present then, if we're doing anything like that, because we're hardwired in a way to think that way.
So unconsciously, to think, right? What's like, look for what's wrong. So if you look at it, sometimes the example, and what's interesting about the brainstem, it's faster than conscious thought. So some people will be really hard on themselves and go, why do I keep doing that? Or why I should know this by now, whatever. It's like, well, that's our default. We're going to go to the problem, or looking at the glass half empty or half full, that kind of thing. But with the neuroplasticity, so our brain is malleable. So what's great is that might be your first instinct, but we can learn to train our attention in a way that we don't respond from that place. We might have that thought, but if we look at where it comes from, as far as an evolutionary tactic, if we were like cave people hanging out, oh, what a beautiful, pond, and look at the sky, it's, clear, and we're in that rest, digest place, right? We're not alert into that sympathetic, is everything okay? Then out comes a saber-toothed tiger or whatever, and then gone, right? So what was adaptive was for a part of our brain to be scanning, are we safe? Are we okay? Are we safe?
Got it.
So this is the thing, going unchecked, it can go into something that we're constantly looking for what's wrong.
For what's wrong, right.
And what we know, and what I teach with mindfulness, is that what we pay attention to grows.
So if we pay attention to our surroundings, not in the fight, flight, safe mode way, and we take awareness of the rhythmic and the stuff that's going on that keeps us present, then we could theoretically, I wouldn't say completely flip it, but we could try and turn the switch.
But I think you can. If you're really present and going, what am I thinking about right now? Where's my attention? And in a non-judgmental way, we're not criticizing about it. We're not like, oh my God, you're thinking about that again, or, whatever. But it's more like, can we come from curiosity? Oh yeah, where is my attention? Oh my gosh, I was thinking about next week. I'm missing out on this moment. What about, instead of, we have the worried mind. What about the wise mind? And this is the way that I teach it with wolves too, this wise wisdom, right? Okay. This wisdom of these animals. So the wise mind is present, is here, and embodied. Instead of lost in thought and in automatic patterns and habits, we're being intentional with our attention. And we're having this presence of curiosity so that I can meet this moment with wisdom. So the worried mind might say, what if? Like, what if it goes wrong? Or what if? And then the wise mind says, what is? Like, what's happening right here, right now? Is this something I can do? Handle? Like, where can I place my attention? Like, how many times we've been with these incredible animals and our mind's drifting off thinking, okay, I got to do this when I get home. And that's always the reminder, mate, come back. Like, be where your feet are, right? Really feel. So when we're in nature and we're looking at this, again, we are an ecosystem that responds to our environment. We're not isolated. We're not these silo, instruments, if you will. Our nervous system is responding to our environment all the time. To our nervous systems right now, because we know each other, right? Yeah. It's already, we're going to have this connection that's going to be soothing to our nervous system. We're going to have this unspoken familiarity, so our nervous system's going to feel that. So when you look out in nature, and when some of the kids that we bring here, it's not comfortable for them. Right. I mean, it's like they're in the city. They're not used to this. And so it's not that it's automatically familiar and that it feels good, but what we know is over time, it starts to shift and they don't know why, but then their nervous systems start to regulate. Then they start to get to this place of calm. Then they're not, they're more aware of their behavior as opposed to there's just a pinball in reactivity. Right. Setting each other off and not even knowing why.
It's like atoms in any type of reaction, right? Just bouncing off of each other. So what are the tools then for when you do these mindfulness, we're talking about nature therapy, and we do some of them here. Obviously, there's meditation. There's just finding your feet. What are some of the ways that you find have worked in getting back to regulation and figuring out how to access the different parts of our brain so that we're not in constant motion, in constant fight or flight, and realizing what's the next thing I need to do and just being present?
So when we're looking at mindfulness or somatic-based practices, they're body-oriented, which the body is always in the present moment. The mind, as we know, drifts. And this part of our frontal lobe, which is the last to evolve as our species, this is a storyteller, right? Which is amazing. It tells incredible stories and some not such great stories, and that's what we get to challenge. We get to challenge those beliefs, right? So if I'm in a thought loop, if I'm lost in my mind, then I can pause and come back to my senses. And these are what the wolves teach us all the time. What am I hearing? What am I smelling? Right? What am I touching? Like there's times, we don't take our shoes off around the animals, right? But there are times that I've taken my shoes off and put my feet in the earth and in the water. I did that with some students recently in the last program. Just feeling with our senses helps to, when we are in a stress response or we're in this kind of rumination of thought and thinking, this can help us to come back and reset, like you used that word, like reset and come back. So it's kind of like shaking it off and then, I'm back here again. So we can use our senses to come back into the moment. We can use each other as far as coming together. Look at the way that the animals migrate. That strengthens their bond, right? Well, we're doing that as a pack with them. Walking, actually just moving your body helps you to get out of the rumination of your minds or back into just the movement can help ground the nervous system. Smelling all the different smells that are, out there. So all of that, and meditation, there's different ways you can do walking meditation. You can do listening to sounds.
Silent meditation, I know you've done. You've had with those retreats. You can just sit, in silence. And it's really where you want to place your attention that can be really helpful. But also there's practices called natural awareness. And we're just literally focusing our attention almost like it's kind of a, not so acute, but almost like it's out in the periphery. So we're taking in everything that's going on instead of one object, and we're just resting our awareness there. Wow.
The Wolf Connection podcast is now sponsored by our new partner, Jacques-Marie Mage. This LA-based brand is known for their limited edition, handcrafted eyewear and luxury goods, but also for their stewardship program, which supports various nonprofits and individuals who are working to protect a future for wild wolves.
That's wild.
And then when our mind drifts off, because it will, it's designed to do that, right?
Sure.
Again, that's evolutionary design. Let's wander. Are we okay? Are we okay? Is everything good, right?
Exactly. Scanning.
We gently bring it back. And the more that we do this, we're training and we're building that neuroplasticity. And so what we pay attention to grows. We know this through neuroscience, that we start to strengthen the gray matter in our brain. And then we can also start to recognize the storytelling of our minds that aren't necessarily true. Like, are these stories that are helpful or unhelpful? Do I want to continue these stories or do I want to rewrite a story?
That's powerful stuff. Yeah.
And this is what these kids are coming here and different, populations that we work with. This is a chance for them to rewrite their story. This is the second chance, that these wolves have had, that we've had, right?
Yeah.
In our own personal lives.
Yeah. So differences that you've seen in this nature-based therapy, as opposed to when people are in their heads and they think possibly the only way they can help these situations is for natural one-on-one therapy or talk therapy. So what are some of the differences that you're seeing when people actually get into the earth and, do these mindfulness practices that they might not understand?
Yeah, so as far as traditional talk therapy, we can look at it as, yes, it's really beautiful to be heard, to be able to share, to be able to communicate, but we can also get lost in just talking, right? And That what we know about trauma is a body-based experience. Trauma lives in the body. It doesn't mean it doesn't impact the mind. We can have a very coherent narrative. You might even have seen people share an example like, oh my God, this happened to me one time in my life. And you're like, wow, how can you be telling me this horrible thing that happened with like, you're totally fine? Well, because they maybe have a coherent narrative about it. They've made sense of it. They have meaning, but it doesn't mean that it doesn't still impact their body. And so their body might still be living it, almost like reliving it with certain things that feel familiar if they're in a certain environment or a certain smell or whatever. So when we come to somatic therapy, we're looking at this body-centric approach that integrates the mind and the body. So we're looking at it in a way that it's not separate from. You can't just talk about it. You really need to feel it through. It's about creating safety, resiliency, tapping into feeling, letting something that wasn't able to be processed in the body, maybe it's stuck. How can we let that release and let it flow? So when we're bringing people into nature, we're giving them access to be in their body. And it's when we're thinking about that mirroring, like nature's, if I'm standing in front of a tree, that tree is not judging me. It's saying, you should be better, you should have a better career, this, that, all those kind of things that we can be lost in the stories about that we've been conditioned to believe that's important and maybe don't really align with our values or what I find is my calling or a sense of purpose or what I'm drawn to. So when we're working with nature, we're helping them to get back into the wholeness of who they are. Who is this ecological system and how is it interacting with the world? So this is this ecological lens that we're using when we're, it's not just treating the mind. We're dealing with this holistic way of being that we're living. And when we see these animals, they're showing us that all the time. Like there's so many times that I've interacted with our wolves and come on, let's go for a hike, and then all of a sudden, like, I remember this one time, Renee and I, we were trying to get, I think it was Neo and I forget who else leashed up. It might have been Jem or something. And we're like, why aren't they, they're normally Neo. He's like, let's go.
Let's go for a walk. Yeah, all the time.
We're like, what is going on, right? And then we were in our heads trying to figure it out. And then we just kind of stopped and we're like, well, we're not going to push this, let's just wait. All of a sudden, hail, like the size of golf balls started coming down. They felt it. We were like, I don't know what's happening. Yeah, it's a little cloudy, it might be a little, but that kind of being connected to our instincts, to our environment and how we were like, well, we're going to take them out and this is what we're going to do. I mean, the good thing is that we've learned enough here that we could pause, follow their beat, like what are they sensing into, as opposed to what we have a tendency to do, many of us human beings, especially living disconnected, is that we override. I've got to get this to-do list done. If I don't get it done, then I'm not worthy or I'm, or whatever, right? We value these values that don't really align in a holistic way. How do we come back? So nature is giving us this mirror to recognize ourselves again, to listen to our instincts, to listen to our body. I mean, again, we've got neurons in our hearts. We have neurons in our gut, in our stomach. This means we have intelligence, right? It's not just in the brain, but we again live in a mind-centric culture that kind of worships the mind and it's just disconnecting us, I feel, even more so. Because look, we can get a lot done. We can get a lot, faster than we've ever been, right? But I think it's too fast. It's not in line with, I think of it this way. I was, part of that women's retreat that I was co-teaching and people wanting, here we talk about sacred timing, right? And I said, for some of us, we have this rose and it's just this bud and we want to peel open, come on, bloom already. And we're not trusting this sacred timing, but that's a lot of the ways that we can be pushing ourselves in our own life. Or maybe we're not giving the sunlight that we need or the watering that we need, the food that we need. Because we're disconnected, we're not really aware.
And just not allowing the natural process to take place. As you said, when you look at the wolves and you see that they are in tune with their bodies at all times and what's going on. They've alerted us to things that aren't feeling right. Or understanding that. And, things that you mentioned too, even when we're walking the land and we're talking about sort of stiffness that we get, if we're working from home, for instance, or we're working on a computer all the time. Right. And you've mentioned this a couple of times, to me and probably some other people too, is that when we're mirroring something that isn't swaying or naturally moving throughout, we sort of take that on. So, and I noticed that too, when I'm working from home and I'm on my computer. What is a computer? It's a stiff, inanimate object that is not moving, that doesn't have anything. So we're merely mirroring that. And how do you co-regulate or get into your body with something that's not able to do that? And you're not really moving about. It's not as though, like you say, you were doing the dishes or you're painting or creating music or poetry. Those things have a lot more of a flow about it as opposed to doing a remedial task.
Absolutely. And when you look at, like, I'm sure you've experienced this, where you've been on the computer so long and you've got a headache and your eyes hurt and your neck is stiff and your shoulders, right? And then what we have a tendency to do, like, our body's communicating something, but then we're like, no, I have a deadline. I have to get this done, or I'll take care of it now so I don't have to deal with it later. We still have just as much the next day. Right. And so this is where we can be out of rhythm in our own life. And then, so I have my own business, right? And so I started to work 7 days a week. And I'm like constantly trying to catch up to the emails or the this or that. And then it's like, wait a minute, when do I rest, right? When am I having this? And we also can live in a culture that's more emphasized of productivity and like, how much are you getting done and what have you, and I think that, again, that is going against our nature, because with the wolves, like, they're going to have, if you look at their migration, it's to get somewhere and to get the den and, to hunt, to all that. And then it's a lot of resting, right? It's a lot of being. It's a lot of just being. And this is what they're mirroring back to us. How much are we pausing throughout the day and just being? So if we look at mindfulness, if we look at somatic-based practices, this is helping us to balance out the overstimulated brain, right? The way that we're overstimulated. We have this overstimulated sympathetic part of our nervous system that is just going. And this is what's creating stress and being out of balance.
Is that what the sympathetic nervous system? Because you said this a lot, and I've always wanted to ask you about that. So, describe what that means, when you say that and what you're trying to either rebuild or protect in that way.
Absolutely. Okay, so we have a nervous system. We have an autonomic part of our nervous system. So that's automatically. So this is a survival instinct. This is what's helped us to thrive as a species. It's not a problem. We don't need to pathologize it. Like, one is better than the other. Sure. Because if we look at the sympathetic part of the branch of our nervous system, this is in charge of survival instincts. That's fight, flight, and freeze and appease, right? This is stuff that has helped us instinctually. This is part of our brainstem, which is faster than conscious thought. So we're going to look for what's wrong, and we are going to immediately respond faster than our prefrontal cortex, which is where the wisdom and the reasoning and what got us to the moon, being able to think about all that kind of stuff. So if you were crossing the street and out of nowhere a car came and barreling through, do you want to use your frontal lobe and go, what are the odds of me getting hit? Or do you want to instinctually fight, like, hey, wake up, or like flee, run, or freeze like a deer, and hopefully it gets around you. So that is wonderful. But guess what? We are constantly stimulated in this response that we are not, or reactivity, we are not in the rest and digest of the parasympathetic part of our nervous system. And this is why we are out of balance. And this is also why we would say we're in a lot of toxic stress. So if we look at, so there was a study done, and they created like this dome in Arizona for this biodiversity, right? And they wanted to see, like, create the perfect environment. So they had the water, the food, the sunlight, everything, temperature. And so everything was growing and thriving. These incredible trees that just kept getting taller and taller, gorgeous. But then all of a sudden they started to fall over. So it's like, why were they falling over? Well, they were missing one ingredient. That was the wind. And the wind is what we push up against. This is this natural way of creating stress, not to the point of stress where, it can't go to the place where we're breaking the trees. But if we look at it in the way that natural balance of our ecosystem is that this stress creates the tree to root down into the earth. So the more that we root down, the more grounded, then we're going to have the flexibility to be able to be adaptable. This is our resiliency. So we can think of life is going to include stress. There's good stress. Challenge is good stress. When it goes into overwhelm, then we go into toxic stress. And this is the trauma part.
So when we're missing the resilience part of it, how does nature, because people will probably listening or seeing this, is how am I going to act like a tree in my life to root myself so that I can deal with the stress that is combating up against myself, or I'm maybe creating those things. So what are the ways that nature-based therapy or the therapeutic, balance that you've seen and that you're teaching for people to take from that in order to root themselves in a way that's moving forward and being able to deal with those issues so that they can be regulated? And that's the other thing is regulation, grounding, and centering. Is how are they able to do that like a tree?
Yes. So, when people say, and I've worked with, I love indigenous cultures. I love indigenous wisdom and healing practices. And I've been doing it for over 30 years and balancing out also, West and different things because I love psychology as well. There's a lot of information. But literally taking off your shoes and put your feet on the earth and just ground into the earth. We have science to show that this literally relaxes the nervous system and activates the parasympathetic. So this is when we think of the polyvagal theory, which is by Stephen Porges. It's the largest cranial nerve starting from here all the way down into like our tailbone, right? So this is this vagal nerve that what we want to do is this is in charge of going into, a sense of safety. We can rest and digest, right? So this means like when you're in a fight or flight, you're looking, like when you see an animal prey drive, they're in a fight or flight. The sympathetic is activated.
Right.
I need to get that prey. This is about survival. I need to live, right? And then we get the prey, they eat, and then what do? They go back and they rest, they digest, they they take in. That's the repair of the nervous system. That's the repair, the rejuvenation, right? So when we are constantly going, I need to find the next prey, we're in this worried mind of what's next. We're missing out on this wise mind in the way of what is, what's enough right here. How can I reset right here? So when I encourage people is we can be in rumination, right? We can be lost in thoughts. We can be, I know we've talked about this, like we can wake up in the middle of the night and our brain is waking us up, right? Because there's so much on our mind. Yeah. And so this can be, how do I ground myself? I'm too much up here, literally. How do I come back down here? Well, we can come back to our senses, right? If you look at, so what's called vagal tone is that the more things that we can do to kind of soothe this part of our nervous system, to activate it, this can be humming. This can be breathing. I love it when I see the wolves. They're howling. They're literally regulating, right? They're regulating as a pack. So co-regulating, be with other people's nervous systems, but take in your senses. When we are in our minds and over-identified and not really present where our feet is, our body's always in the present moment. It's our mind that is going into the future and the past. We're storytellers. We're time travelers. That's fine if you're consciously aware of it, but what stories are you telling? Are they helpful? And, are you really conscious of where you are? Are you missing out with what's here right now? So when we come back to our senses, we're in nature. Just take in the wind in the trees.
Yeah.
Just take in the howl of the animals. Just take in the smells. Just take in the sense of contact that you're feeling the land underneath you. And what if I am in relationship with all of this so that I'm feeling this interconnectedness and this sense of belonging, that I'm not alone, that I am part of this ecosystem.
Right. And the one thing that you said when you said put your feet in the ground, I remember this when I used to live in New York too, and I was on Long Island. And I used to put your feet in the sand with the waves and let the waves and the sand sort of build over your feet. And there was never a sense of fear of that. It was always wondering, how deep can my feet get?
Oh,
So,
right.
so you have to pull them out. But to this end, that's such a great relationship that it triggered for me in my head about that when you talk about putting your feet in the earth, is we constantly are pushing ourselves to the limits and not understanding. And you're talking about being in relationship with not only the outside forces, but the inside forces too. Right. When we do that, if somebody's thinking about this and relating to how our wolves and wolf dogs regulate,
right,
and they know inside themselves, we push ourselves to where we say, or at least I've seen this with myself, I need to take a nap. My body's like, you cannot walk a step further, you got to chill. And there's a difference between, when people work out and they push themselves to a limit, but there's always that rest and there's always that rejuvenation.
Right.
So why is it that we as a society sometimes can't just listen to what's going on? Is it just because of the outside factors, or what could be some other things there that hit?
Yeah, I think that we're living in a modern way that's not focusing on the best interest of people, but focusing on productivity, right?
Mm-hmm.
And even in the wellness industry, there's a lot of push there. There's a lot of, experts that have all the answers. And it's like, what about coming back to, what do you know? It's your body. What does your body want? So I would say that the modern way of living is not directing us to come back home. And when you look at ecology, right, in ecotherapy, it's about healing in the sense of home, coming back to who you are. And so a lot of us are chasing outside of ourselves. The answer is outside of ourselves. The person, place, or thing, then I'll be happy.
Or the pressure from other,
absolutely,
whatever those things may
be. The conditioning from society, from our family of origin, whatever it is, our culture, right? And so what if, because we look at these animals here and we say, there's a sacred timing. It's not about pushing. We look at, I think again, it's like here when I was using that rose, that bud at the, as a metaphor for the women's retreat that I was teaching. And it's like, oh, okay, so let's, this needs to be in bloom, and like pulling the petals open. It's like, instead of trusting this natural evolution, because we only have so much capacity. We want a challenge to build our capacity, but if we're pushing, we're going to go into survival default mode. We're actually not going to build our resilience. We're going to actually build more narratives that say, you didn't do enough, you should do more, you should work harder, what's wrong with you? So part of the other thing is, with mindfulness as an intervention, is it includes compassion, right? It's not just being aware, it's having this friendliness, this warmth, this kindness. And so I really love the teaching is that if compassion doesn't include you, it's not compassion.
Yeah, because you're just going to drive yourself into the ground and not be of use to yourself, right, or your pack at home, depending, right, upon what that is, right? Your
pack at work, whatever. It's like, if you're burning yourself out, and we are interconnected, we are all relational beings connecting in ways all the time. Our nervous system is looking for regulation. We're social mammals. That's how we've evolved. Then if we're not listening to that and we're not taking care of ourselves, that's actually going to impact other people in our lives. And this is the wisdom of the wolves, that they get that. They know that. And I think about the wolves here that we trusted as sacred timing. Like Kenai, we didn't say, come on, Kenai, get over it already, leash up. Or we were like, no, we're going to trust your inner knowing. We're going to offer the opportunity to be leashed. And if that doesn't call to you, we're going to honor that. And when he was ready, he let us know.
Yeah.
Right. And was that too soon, too late, or was that exactly what he needed? And this is where, are we listening to ourselves in that way? And can we give ourselves the space? This is what I love about nature, a spaciousness. How would you say that potentially in a modern way of living that we keep filling up space? I mean, you look at our calendars. If we look at space, I know for me, a teacher said to me many years ago, where's the space in your calendar? And I'm like, oh, that's a goal?
That's a thing?
Right? And they're like, how does your body feel when you look at your calendar, your work schedule? And I was just like, I never even thought of that. I want a lot more space, right? And we're looking at space. So when you said the thing about your feet in the sand as a kid and what that brought back to you, that's your body experiencing this beautiful connection, this relationship. We're taking that away in traditional education right now, where we're giving them more stuff to do in their heads and less stuff to be in their bodies with. We're taking the arts away. We're taking sports to a certain degree away. And then we're wondering why these kids can't co-regulate. We're wondering why they can't be present, why they're not interested. Well, we're not giving them the space to be kids. We're not giving them that time to be able to connect.
Yeah. And this leads perfectly into what you're developing with the rooted resilience is the space we give for the kids. And you said this before we started, the language that's being developed.
Yeah.
In the program for the youth that gets taken back to the schools isn't a universal language because it's not being taught for everyone necessarily. The facilitators sometimes don't get that.
Right.
So just talk briefly about what the rooted resilience is and how that works for the facilitators and the teachers so that they can be involved in it also. So it's really a one-pack mentality at this point.
There you go. So I've been working in education for many years, and I started because I wanted to support the kids. And then I'm like, oh my God, I really want to support the teachers, because this is a lot to hold. But then I was saying, you can't do one without the other. They're in relationship with each other, right? They're in their own ecosystem at the school.
Yeah.
So it's not that, and a lot of times teachers will be like, well, I just want to do this for the kid. Even when they come here, let the kids have a good experience. And we're like, no, you're with us too. We're a pack together. So this rooted resilience is this trauma-informed educational workshop program so that educators can get their own experience with understanding nature-based interventions, animal-assisted interventions, understanding their own nature, understanding this common language that we can use so that we are finding a way to co-regulate. We're finding a way to understand when I'm dysregulated as a leader, so we look at it as a teacher, dysregulated, you can look at that as a pack animal. If their leader is dysregulated, that's going to permeate throughout the whole pack, right? Yeah. So if the teacher is like, I'm burnt out, I'm fatigued, I'm overwhelmed, how are they going to be able to hold a space ultimately for the students, right? And then of course the students are here to challenge. They're going through their own rites of passage, especially in adolescence. And so if I stay regulated, if I tap into my resilience, right? If I care for myself, because a lot of teachers, the number one challenge is their own self-compassion, right? How can we create this program for them that they are finding their own lifeline? They're coming back to their own flow in nature. They're realizing how they could do things differently for themselves, their own well-being, so then their classroom and all that they're working with can be more cohesive.
Yeah. If anybody's listening and wants to learn more about how to get involved with that program, what's the best way for them to do that?
Yeah, so definitely you can contact me through Wolf Connection. You can contact me directly, lauriecousins@gmail.com. We will provide some resources at the end of this podcast as well. So yeah, obviously this podcast is going to give us a lot of great information, and then more to come, right? With us as we start to work into, especially we're targeting more of the antelope schools in this area. So, but it's definitely open because we'll be doing, we'll be coming to schools, working in their setting, and then we'll be doing an immersive experience where they can come here and really get that nature aspect to kind of seal the whole thing that they're learning about.
That's awesome. And it's really creating like an emotional sustainability and a classroom application for this whole thing, which is great. And it's cool to have a whole encompassing, because that's what we do here, is create bonds and relationships and packs. And we want to have these packs that are helping each other out. So if we have one classroom that's able to do it, they can hopefully teach the next classroom, and so on and so forth. That'd be awesome. That's so cool.
Yeah.
I mean, this has really been awesome for me, because I've heard you talk about all these wonderful things, and to do a deep dive with you about, and probably scratch the surface. We could probably talk for hours about this, but it's really been great to get to know you on a deeper level. You're teaching where this all comes from and how it's applicable to us here at Wolf Connection. So last question, Laurie, is when you hear the word wolf, what comes to your mind?
Well, I say this when I work with other people, so now I'm going to just allow it come to me in the moment. It makes me want to cry. I would say magnificent resilience and heartful connection.
Yeah. Laurie Cousins, really incredible work that you've done with us, you're continuing to do, and just good advice and tools and teachings for everybody out there who's listening. This is, I think, hopefully impacts some folks, and they'll reach out to us and to you, and we can make these inroads even more. So thank you for everything you're doing.
Thank you so much, Sean. This is such a pleasure. I'm so, so happy for you and Stephen and what you're doing for our community and for so many people out there. It's beautiful.
We appreciate that. Thank you so much, Laurie. How's Teal out there? We'll be with you next time. Bye, everybody.